In the past year or so, our eyes have been on the so-called Arab Spring and the harsh crackdowns on pro-democracy movements in Syria, Egypt and Libya. But there is a smaller democracy movement right on Australia's doorstep in West Papua, part of Indonesia, that's largely ignored here. Yet it is simmering with tension and there are reports of escalating violence. Last week, Indonesian police shot dead an activist leader who was, they said, resisting arrest. That in turn ignited a riot where cars and homes were torched. To discuss this tense situation in West Papua, I'm joined from Melbourne by activist and student Ronnie Kareni. Green Senator Richard Di Natale is in our Canberra studio, and with me here in the Sydney studio is Professor Peter King from the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies at Sydney University. Welcome to you all. Peter King, if I could come to you first. Now, the Jakarta Post is reporting that 17 people have been killed just in the past month, including some Indonesian soldiers. So that would indicate there is violence on both sides, wouldn't it?
There's violence on both sides, but most of the violence is undoubtedly orchestrated by the army, and often the army is in conflict with the police and therefore provokes the police in various ways, actually by attacking police in some cases.
So what is the evidence that it is being committed overwhelmingly by the military and the police, the Indonesian military?
I've heard reports in Jakarta that people are intrigued by the fact that there seem to be professional marksmen, even snipers, at work, particularly in Jayapura, but elsewhere where these killings have taken place.
Senator Di Natale, the Greens have called for the Australian government to pressure Indonesia to stop this violence. That suggests you think it is perhaps all one way, the violence?
Oh, there's no doubt that there's been a huge degree of violence being perpetrated by the Indonesian authorities. Of course, there's resistance in the region, and look, conflicts escalated over recent weeks, and we've seen the deaths of a number of protesters, and in fact we're seeing houses being torched, people being injured, and the really frightening part is that nobody's being held responsible for these atrocities, and that's a real concern.
So in fact you're saying that nobody's been arrested, there are no investigations into who's doing this?
Well, that's right, and part of the problem is that we don't have access to the region. For example, journalists can't access the region. We've got problems with human rights organisations being able to access West Papua. One of the things that needs to happen as a matter of urgency is to allow the media into West Papua to be able to document what's happening, and also to allow independent access to human rights monitors. That's really critical if we're going to get a more accurate picture of what's going on, and of course that will act as a bit of a circuit breaker as well, because at the moment the Indonesian forces are allowed to act with almost impunity.
Senator Di Natale, I mean, the Australian government has said that, you know, basically this is an internal matter for Indonesia to sort out. You don't accept that?
Well, I think it's very clear that if you look at the parallels with East Timor, we said that until the moment we intervened in that conflict. All around the world, countries right across the spectrum are asking for the Indonesian military and putting pressure on the Indonesian government to intervene in this conflict. Australia does need to take a more active role. We need to show more leadership on this issue. We need to stand up for the human rights of the people of West Papua who are being killed and injured as we speak. We've got political prisoners, 60 or so that have been arrested since 2008. Philip Karma, for example, imprisoned for 15 years. Amnesty International describe him as a prisoner of conscience. We've got a responsibility to take a very strong and active leadership role on this issue. It's on our doorstep. People are being killed, and we need to make it very clear that the Indonesian government needs to do more.
Ronnie Kareni, you are Papuan, although you've never actually lived there. Now, since East Timor's independence, Indonesia, as we understand it, has indicated that it would give more self-determination to West Papua. I guess a bit like the province of Aceh achieved after the tsunami there. What has happened to those undertakings by the Indonesian government?
Well, since 2001, the special autonomy was introduced, but after 10 years, it has failed the people of West Papua, and there is no concrete development that is happening in the grassroots, whereas it has been framed as the social and economic issues that has been going on in West Papua. But I also have to mention that no one in this world wants to see a Syrian scenario in the Western Pacific, but this is what the Indonesian government is creating in West Papua. And also,
so do you fear that it is going to escalate to that sort of level where many innocent civilians are going to be killed by the authorities?
Yes, definitely. There's going to be continued violence and escalating conflict happening unless there is an international peacekeeping force coming into West Papua. There will be more killing.
All right. Now, I think you were about to go on and talk about the funeral of the activist leader last week. We're seeing some pictures on screen of it now. Now, in the end, he was shot dead by the Indonesian police, who've actually admitted it, haven't they?
Yes, most reports have claimed that Marco Tabuni, a student leader by the West Papua National Committee, was shot by Dancers 88. Which the Dancers 88 was trained and funded by Australia and America. So in that killing and its shooting in itself, it's an assassination. Whereas now a lot of the political activists are being targeted, and that's one example already the world has already witnessed now. And still there is more other political activists, their life is in danger, and now they're still in hiding because of this ongoing military brutality, and a lot of their actions were pretty much take course with impunity.
Yeah,
and
Ronnie,
now it is really...
The Indonesian government says that that particular Mr. Tabuni was armed and that he was resisting arrest, and that's how he got shot and he died on the way to hospital. The activists, as we understand it, they have said that they have also laid down their arms and that they want to do things peacefully. They have been doing things peacefully. Is that happening in practice, though?
I would be surprised to see if that comment has came out, but the reality, if the Indonesian police and military believe that he was armed, they should have already, if he's wanted, he would be already given a search warrant or a warrant first, and then he'll be arrested. But why should he be shot on the spot, rather than being approached first and then consider and find out more information about the allegations that were made against him? But the reality is that in West Papua, it's not safe. A lot of my close friends, political activists, are in danger, and they have to, they have to move from one place to another in order to find safety and seek refuge.
Professor King, this Indonesian government is very different to the Indonesian government that we saw when East Timor was trying to get its independence under Suharto. I mean, do you feel that it will escalate in the way that Ronnie Karenni seems to think it will?
I think so, because the President has said himself that the deaths in Papua are a small issue, a very limited conflict compared to what's going on in the Middle East. This is completely the wrong approach, because as Ronnie Karenni has said, the Papuans have been in revolt against the oppression of the Indonesians for well over 40 years. And the situation now is that there's certain desperation in their struggle, and this is dangerous for Indonesia if the military is not brought under control.
Yeah. Richard Di Natale, what is your view of this? Because it is a very different Indonesian government. Do you think they are misrepresenting the struggle there by the activists who do want some greater degree of self-determination?
Look, I think it is fair to say that this is a different government, and I think it's fair to say that within some quarters of the government there is some appetite to try and resolve the issue, but we do have the security forces that act with near impunity in the region. We had a situation only 7 or 8 months ago where thousands of West Papuans were protesting freely. We had a number of people killed. We had people arrested and injured. It was a bloodbath in October of last year, and you would think that the Indonesian government may have reacted to that, but instead we've seen a continuation of the violence. It's a very, very tense situation at the moment. We've now got the killing of another activist in the region. I think things are very, very tense, and the government in Indonesia needs to act decisively to resolve this issue. It's really important, and it's critical that the Australian government takes a leadership role with this conflict. We need to make it very, very clear that the region needs access to human rights monitors, it needs access to a free and independent press, and we need to give the right to the to the West Papuan people to determine what sort of future they want for themselves.
Right. I'd like to get Professor King's view on that, because of course Aceh did achieve some level of autonomy. What's the difference, and why couldn't West Papua be the same if that's what the people there want? The
big difference is that the Papuans have never been given a proper negotiation with the Indonesian government. Even the special autonomy deal was thrust on them, and because they really had no trust in it at all. Whereas the Achenese got to negotiate their own settlement, they got to organise their own political parties, which is forbidden to the Papuans. And
so what's the difference? They're both in the Indonesian archipelago.
The tsunami made a difference, a big difference in Aceh. And I suspect the Indonesian government is heading to a situation where if there is an atrocity comparable to what happened in East Timor in 1991 onwards, then the Indonesian government will suddenly find they do have to offer the Papuans something much more generous than they're contemplating at the moment.
But do you think this is just sort of a scare talk, or do you actually really think there is a possible threat of that?
Oh, certainly. Because the army hasn't been brought under control, there's always the danger that the army will begin essentially rioting against the people, which is what happened in Wamena a couple of weeks ago.
Just tell us a little bit about what happened
there. That was
there.
when the little boy was run over by a couple of soldiers on motorbikes, and the police killed one of those. The local people killed one of those police.
Were they soldiers or police?
They were soldiers, I believe, and the result was a military riot against the Papuans, just over the revenge for that single killing, in which dozens of houses were burnt and 8 people or more, we don't know, actually killed.
Ronnie Karenni, can you just give us a picture as to why self-determination is so important to the people of West Papua?
Yeah, since '61, the Dutch, just before they're going to leave, they already prepared West Papua for a self-determination, but it was during the coal era, and in '69 there was a sham referendum that took place, which the West Papuans were not consulted in the process, and then during the '69 referendum, the indigenous by West Papuans were selected, and in a duress condition they were forced to be part of Indonesia, and that was why now that indigenous West Papuans are still fighting and calling for that review of that referendum to give a proper way forward for the Papuans to choose and determine their own future.
All right, so you obviously don't feel part of Indonesia at all?
Well, ethnically, culturally, in the Melanesians, already in the history, we're not part of Indonesia. We are Melanesians by ethnic and by culture. All right, but it is the idealism that has really put, and colonialism that has really put West Papua into this situation. And it's sad to say, but yeah, a lot more people are dying as day goes by.
Richard Di Natale, do you think the Australian government is sort of looking too much to the Middle East and not enough to its own doorstep?
Oh, absolutely. I think we've ignored this conflict for many years. It's escalating. It's becoming very, very tense. I, in fact, asked a question of Minister Carr in question time, and he demonstrated he has no sympathy for the cause of the West Papuan people. We do need to resolve this issue, and it may be that a renegotiated special autonomy package would be something that the West Papuan people would accept. But I think the problem is they've essentially had solution after solution imposed on them. They now feel that they have no choice but to continue this conflict, and it is now an armed conflict, and it needs a resolution, and it needs the Australian government to take a very firm and active leadership role.
All right. Is it too late for dialogue?
Oh, it's never too late for dialogue. I think dialogue is absolutely what's necessary here.
All right.
And I think the Indonesian government needs to start that process very, very quickly with the people of West Papua.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. I do thank you all for joining us. Senator Richard Di Natale, Ronnie Karenni in Melbourne, and Professor Peter King here with me in Sydney. Thanks so much for joining us. And